When billionaire CEO Alexander Reed mocked a 7-year-old homeless girl, challenging her to play piano for adoption, he expected to humiliate her. Instead, her miraculous performance would shatter everything he thought he knew about worth, talent, and destiny, but no one imagined what would come next. If you're enjoying this incredible true story of transformation, please hit that like button and tell me in the comments what moment touched your heart the most. The December wind cut through Manhattan like a blade, sending newspaper scraps dancing around the polished shoes of Alexander Reed as he stepped out of his black Tesla onto Fifth Avenue. At 32, he commanded Reed Industries with the ruthless precision that had built his billion-dollar empire from nothing. His charcoal Armani suit cost more than most people earned in months, and his Patek Philippe watch caught the morning light with every calculated gesture. "Mr. Reed, the board meeting is in 20 minutes, his assistant Marcus called from behind, struggling to keep pace with Alexander's long strides toward the imposing glass tower that bore his name. Alexander barely acknowledged him, his steel-grey eyes focused ahead with laser intensity. He had transformed himself from a nobody into New York's youngest self-made billionaire, and he wore that achievement like armor against a world that had once dismissed him. But as he rounded the corner near the prestigious Steinway Music Academy, something made him stop dead in his tracks. A small figure huddled against the Academy's wrought-iron fence, pressed close to one of the tall windows. It was a little girl, no more than 7 years old, her tangled dark hair escaping from a worn knit cap. Her clothes were layers of mismatched garments, an oversized coat that had seen better days, boots with holes that let in the cold, and fingerless gloves that barely covered her tiny hands. What struck Alexander most was her complete stillness. While the bustling city moved around her like a river, she remained frozen, her dark eyes fixed on something inside the music academy with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Sophia, come away from there," came a weary voice. An older man approached, weathered face, kind eyes, wearing the uniform of a building maintenance worker. "You'll catch pneumonia standing in this cold." The little girl, Sophia, turned toward him but didn't move away from the window. "Just 5 more minutes, please, Uncle Pete. They're playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Listen to how the melody weaves through the harmony." Alexander's eyebrows shot up. A 7-year-old street kid talking about Chopin? He found himself moving closer, drawn by curiosity, despite his usual indifference to the city's countless homeless. Uncle Pete sighed, pulling his worn jacket tighter. "Sophia, we've talked about this. You can't keep coming here every day. The security guards are starting to notice, and we can't afford any trouble." "But Uncle Pete, I can hear every note, every dynamic marking. Today, the student played the crescendo in measure 42 exactly like Rubinstein's 1960 recording. Did you know that recording was made right here in New York at—" "That's enough," Pete interrupted gently but firmly. "We need to go find some breakfast." Alexander found himself stepping forward before he could stop himself. The expensive leather of his shoes clicked against the sidewalk, drawing both their attention. Sophia's dark eyes met his, and he saw something there that made him pause, not the usual defeated look of the homeless, but a spark of intelligence and hope. "Excuse me," Alexander said, his voice carrying the authority that commanded boardrooms. "I couldn't help overhearing. Did you just reference a specific Rubinstein recording?" Sophia nodded eagerly, seemingly unbothered by his intimidating presence. "Arthur Rubinstein, 1960, RCA Victor recording. He played the Nocturne with this incredible emotional restraint in the opening, but then let the passion build gradually through the middle section. Most pianists rush that part, but Rubinstein understood that Chopin's genius was in the spaces between the notes as much as the notes themselves." Alexander stared at her, momentarily speechless. This ragged child was discussing classical piano performance with more sophistication than most music critics. "How do you know about Rubinstein?" he asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to genuinely curious. Sophia's face lit up like sunrise breaking through clouds. "I listen. Every day, I stand here and listen to the lessons. I've been coming here for 2 years, learning everything I can. The teachers inside don't know, but I've memorized hundreds of pieces just by listening. Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, I know them all." Uncle Pete looked embarrassed. "Sophia, don't bother the nice man. We should go—" "Wait." Alexander held up a hand, studying the girl with new interest. An idea was forming. Cruel, perhaps, but it would provide him with entertainment and teach this presumptuous child a valuable lesson about knowing her place. "You say you've learned to play piano just by listening?" "Yes, sir." Sophia's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I practice the fingerings on this piece of cardboard Uncle Pete found for me. See?" She pulled out a wrinkled piece of cardboard with piano keys drawn in careful black marker. "I practice every night, imagining the sounds." Alexander's mouth curved into what might have been mistaken for a smile, but his eyes remained cold. "Well then, little prodigy, I have a proposition for you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, checking the time with theatrical precision. "I happen to be Alexander Reed. Perhaps you've heard of Reed Industries? I own half the buildings on this block, including some rather significant investments in the arts." Sophia shook her head innocently. "I don't know about business, sir. I only know about music." "Of course you don't," Alexander said with condescending amusement. "Well, here's what I'm thinking. If you're truly as talented as you claim, let's put it to the test. I'll arrange for you to play the Academy's concert grand piano right now. If you can actually play something impressive, something that proves you're not just another delusional street kid, then." He paused dramatically, enjoying the building suspense. Several passers-by had stopped to watch the exchange, drawn by the spectacle of an expensively dressed businessman addressing a homeless child. "Then I'll adopt you myself. Give you a real home, proper education, piano lessons with the best teachers money can buy, everything a little girl could want." Sophia's eyes grew wide with disbelief and hope. You really mean it?" "Absolutely," Alexander said smoothly. "But when you fail, and you will fail, because real musical talent requires years of proper training, expensive instruments, and breeding that you simply don't possess, then you promise to stop this ridiculous fantasy and find something more suitable to your station. Deal?" Uncle Pete stepped protectively closer to Sophia. "Now wait just a minute." "It's okay, Uncle Pete," Sophia said softly, her small hand touching his arm. "I can do this." She looked up at Alexander with determination that seemed far beyond her 7 years. "I accept your challenge, Mr. Reed." Alexander's smile widened, but it held no warmth. "Excellent. Marcus," he called to his assistant, "call the Academy. Tell them Alexander Reed needs access to their concert hall immediately. Corporate donation business." As Marcus made the call, Alexander looked down at Sophia with satisfaction. In 10 minutes, he would have taught this child and everyone watching a valuable lesson about the natural order of things. The wealthy belonged at the top, and the poor belonged at the bottom. No amount of wishful thinking could change that fundamental truth. But as he watched Sophia straighten her thin shoulders and lift her chin with quiet dignity, something flickered in the back of his mind. A memory he couldn't quite grasp, of another child, long ago, who had dreamed of music beyond her reach. He pushed the thought away impatiently. Sentiment was weakness, and Alexander Reed had no room for weakness in his perfectly ordered world. But in just a few moments, that perfectly ordered world was about to shatter completely. Before we continue with this amazing story, please like this video if you're as amazed as I am by Sophia's courage, and comment below what you think will happen next. The interior of the Steinway Music Academy was everything Sophia had imagined and more. Gleaming hardwood floors reflected the soft light filtering through tall windows, and the walls were lined with portraits of legendary musicians who seemed to watch over the sacred space. The scent of wood polish and the lingering resonance of countless musical moments filled the air like incense. Alexander strode through the elegant lobby with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. The Academy's director, Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, a dignified woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into an impeccable chignon, hurried to meet them. "Mr. Reed." "What an unexpected pleasure," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of old New York society. "Marcus mentioned something about a corporate matter?" "Something like that," Alexander replied smoothly, his eyes already surveying the space with the calculating gaze of a predator. "I need access to your concert hall for a few minutes. A small demonstration." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes fell on Sophia, and her expression shifted to one of gentle concern. "And this young lady is—" "The subject of our demonstration," Alexander said dismissively. "Don't worry, it won't take long." Sophia had barely moved since entering the academy. She stood in the center of the lobby, turning slowly, her dark eyes wide with wonder as she took in every detail. Her fingers moved unconsciously, as if she were already playing invisible keys. "I can hear it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The music that lives in these walls. Hundreds of years of beautiful sounds, all layered together like a symphony of memories." Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose with interest. "What an unusual way to put it, dear. Are you a music student?" Before Sophia could answer, Alexander interrupted impatiently. "Mrs. Whitmore, if we could proceed to the concert hall? I have a board meeting in 15 minutes. The concert hall took Sophia's breath away. The Steinway concert grand piano sat center stage like a sleeping giant, its ebony surface reflecting the soft stage lights. Red velvet seats rose in elegant tiers, and the acoustics were so perfect that Sophia could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the silence. "There you go, little prodigy," Alexander said, gesturing toward the piano with mock grandeur. "Your moment of truth." A small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Whitmore, several Academy staff members who had been curious about the commotion, Uncle Pete hovering nervously near the entrance, and Marcus recording everything on his phone with barely concealed amusement. Sophia approached the piano slowly, reverently, as if approaching an altar. Her small fingers traced the edge of the keyboard without pressing any keys. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I've dreamed about this moment for so long." Alexander checked his watch theatrically. "Well, we haven't got all day. Play something, if you can." Sophia looked up at him, and for a moment Alexander saw something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. Not fear or anger, but something that looked almost like pity. "What would you like me to play, Mr. Reed?" she asked quietly. "Oh, I think you should choose," Alexander said with false generosity. "After all, you're the expert, aren't you? Something impressive, something that will prove you're worth my investment." Sophia nodded thoughtfully, then adjusted the piano bench to accommodate her small stature. She sat with perfect posture, her feet dangling several inches above the pedals, her hands poised over the keys with natural grace. "I'd like to play Chopin's Ballade No. One in G minor," she said. "It's the piece that taught me what it means to tell a story through music." Alexander's smirk faltered slightly. Chopin's first ballade was notoriously difficult, a piece that challenged even professional pianists with its technical demands and emotional complexity. "Are you sure you don't want to start with something simpler?" Mrs. Whitmore asked kindly. "Perhaps a basic scale or—" "No, ma'am," Sophia said with quiet certainty. "This is the piece that speaks to me." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then her fingers found the keys. The opening notes of the ballade emerged with such clarity and sensitivity that several people in the small audience gasped audibly. This wasn't the hesitant plinking of a child playing at piano. This was music in its purest form, flowing from Sophia's small hands like water from a spring. Alexander felt his confident smirk freeze on his face. This was impossible. The child was playing with technical precision that rivaled conservatory students, but more than that, she was playing with genuine musical understanding, shaping each phrase with mature artistry. As Sophia moved into the more complex middle sections of the piece, her entire being seemed to merge with the music. Her body swayed slightly with the melodic lines. Her fingers danced across the keys with impossible speed and accuracy, and her face reflected every emotional nuance of Chopin's masterpiece. The audience was spellbound. Mrs. Whitmore had tears in her eyes. Uncle Pete stood with his mouth hanging open in amazement. Even Marcus had stopped recording, too stunned to continue. But it was Alexander who was experiencing the most profound shock. As Sophia played, memories he had buried deep in his subconscious began to surface, memories of another little girl long ago who had loved music with the same desperate passion. A girl who had been told she wasn't good enough, wasn't worth the investment, wasn't deserving of her dreams. That little girl had been his sister, Emma. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Emma, who had died in a car accident when she was only 8, had talked about music the same way Sophia did, had dreamed with the same intensity, had been dismissed by their wealthy relatives with the same cruel indifference Alexander was showing now. Sophia reached the climactic section of the ballad, her small hands somehow managing to stretch across octaves that should have been impossible for her size. The music soared through the concert hall, filled with triumph and tragedy, hope and heartbreak, all woven together in Chopin's incomparable genius. And then, as the final notes faded into silence, Sophia opened her eyes and looked directly at Alexander. In that moment, he saw not just a homeless child, but a profound musical soul who had been given an impossible gift. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity before Mrs. Whitmore began to clap. Slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The other staff members joined in, then Uncle Pete, until the small concert hall was filled with thunderous applause. But Alexander couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what he had just witnessed. This little girl, this street child he had intended to humiliate, had just delivered one of the most moving musical performances he had ever experienced. "Mr. Reed," Sophia's voice was small but clear. Did I do okay?" Alexander stared at her, his world tilting on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about worth, about talent, about who deserved opportunities, was crumbling around him. "How?" he finally managed to whisper. "How is this possible?" Sophia's eyes sparkled with the joy of someone finally being seen, finally being heard. "I told you, sir. I listen. Every day for 2 years, I've listened to every lesson, every masterclass, every practice session. I memorized every piece, studied every technique. I practiced the fingerings on my cardboard piano until I could feel the music in my bones." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But more than that, Mr. Reed, music isn't about having expensive things or being born into the right family. Music is about having a heart that understands beauty and hands willing to work until that beauty can be shared with the world." Alexander felt something breaking inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart years ago, built from grief and disappointment and the cruel lessons of a world that measured worth in dollars rather than dreams. "Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion he hadn't felt in decades. "And do you?" But before he could finish his sentence, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his head of security. As he read the text, His face went white. Someone had been asking questions about him. Someone had been digging into his past, into secrets he had buried so deep he thought they could never surface. And somehow, impossibly, it was all connected to the little girl standing before him. If this story is touching your heart like it's touching mine, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you believe in the power of second chances. The boardroom of Reed Industries occupied the entire 42nd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan. But Alexander couldn't focus on the familiar skyline as he paced behind his mahogany desk, his usually perfect composure shattered. 3 hours had passed since Sophia's performance, and he hadn't been able to concentrate on a single business matter. His senior executives had eventually given up trying to conduct the scheduled meeting and quietly filed out, exchanging concerned glances about their CEO's uncharacteristic behavior. Marcus knocked softly on the glass door before entering. "Mr. Reed, the private investigator you requested is here." "Send him in," Alexander said curtly, not turning from the window. Detective Ray Morrison was a former NYPD detective who specialized in discreet investigations for high-profile clients. Tall and weathered, with intelligent gray eyes that missed nothing, he had helped Alexander navigate several delicate situations over the years. "Alex," Ray said, settling into one of the leather chairs facing the desk. "Got your message about running a background check on someone named Sophia, street kid, about 7 years old?" Alexander finally turned around, and Ray was struck by the haunted look in the younger man's eyes. "What did you find?" Ray opened his tablet, scanning through his notes. "Interesting case. Sophia Martinez, age 7, has been living with Pete Kowalski for about 2 years. Pete's a good man, works maintenance for several buildings in the area, never been in trouble with the law. Clean record, pays his taxes, looks after the kid like she's his own granddaughter." "How did she end up with him?" Alexander asked, settling heavily into his chair. "That's where it gets complicated," Ray said, his expression growing more serious. "Sophia's mother was Elena Martinez, age 26. She died in a car accident on the FDR Drive 2 years ago. Single mother, no family anyone could locate. Worked multiple jobs trying to make ends meet." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. Car accident. Head-on collision with a drunk driver. Elena was coming home from her night shift at a diner in Queens. Ray paused, studying Alexander's reaction. "The thing is, Alex, Elena wasn't alone in the car that night." "What do you mean?" "There was another passenger, a 5-year-old girl, who miraculously survived with only minor injuries. That was Sophia, but here's the really interesting part." Ray leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Elena Martinez wasn't Sophia's biological mother." Alexander's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "What?" "According to the hospital records and social services files, Elena had been caring for Sophia since the child was about 3 years old. But there's no legal adoption paperwork, no birth certificate listing Elena as the mother. It's as if Sophia just appeared in Elena's life." "That's impossible," Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ray pulled up another screen on his tablet. "I did some deeper digging following Elena's background. Turns out she had connections to the foster care system, worked informally, helping kids who fell through the cracks. The kind of woman who would take in a child, no questions asked, if that child needed help. But where did Sophia come from originally?" "That's what I'm still working on," Ray admitted. "But I found something else, something I think you need to see." He turned the tablet toward Alexander, showing a newspaper clipping from 3 years ago. Alexander's blood turned to ice as he read the headline, "Reed Industries, CEO's sister remembered on anniversary of tragic death." I don't understand why you're showing me this," Alexander said carefully, but his hands were shaking. Ray's expression was gentle but persistent. "Alex, I've known you for 5 years. I've never seen you react to anyone the way Marcus described you reacting to this little girl today, so I did some checking into your family history." He pulled up another document. "Emma Reed, your younger sister, died in a car accident when she was 8 years old. But what's interesting is that Emma had a daughter, a little girl who was 3 years old when Emma died." Alexander shot to his feet. "That's not possible. Emma never had children. She was only 8 when she died." "Not your sister Emma," Ray said quietly. "Your other sister, Emma Reed Morrison. She took her husband's name when she married. Ring any bells?" The room seemed to spin around Alexander. Emma Morrison, his half-sister born when Alexander was in college, the product of his father's second marriage after Alexander's mother died. Emma, who had been cut off from the Reed family fortune when she married a man their father deemed unsuitable. Emma, who had disappeared from Alexander's life when he was building his empire, too focused on success to maintain family connections. "Emma Morrison died 3 years ago," Ray continued gently. "Car accident on the Queensborough Bridge. Left behind a 3-year-old daughter named Sophia. The child was placed in emergency foster care, but somehow ended up with Elena Martinez instead of going through official channels." Alexander collapsed back into his chair, the full weight of the revelation crushing down on him. She's Emma's daughter. She's my niece." "The timeline fits perfectly," Ray confirmed. "Sophia would have been about 3 when Emma died, about 4 when Eleanor took her in. The musical talent runs in families. I found records of Emma Morrison performing in local community theatre productions, always in the musical roles." Alexander's mind reeled back to that morning, to Sophia's impossible performance, to the way she had looked at him with those dark eyes that now seemed hauntingly familiar. Emma's eyes, his half-sister's eyes. "There's more," Ray said, his voice becoming even more serious. "Someone else has been looking for Sophia. Someone with resources and connections. They've been making inquiries through official channels, private investigators, even reaching out to street contacts. Who? I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they've been systematic about it. Professional. This isn't just curiosity. Someone wants to find Sophia very badly." Alexander stood and walked back to the window, staring down at the bustling city below. Somewhere down there, his niece, his only living family, was living on the streets with a kind maintenance worker, dreaming of music she could only steal through windows. "Alex," Ray said softly, "there's something else you should know. Elena Martinez worked 3 jobs to try to provide for Sophia, but she was also secretly saving every penny she could. When she died, she left a letter with Pete, asking him to make sure Sophia got music lessons when the money was available." Alexander closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the tragedy of it all. Elena, a stranger who had loved his niece enough to die providing for her. Pete, a working-class man, giving everything he had to care for a child that wasn't his. And Sophia, brilliant and gifted and homeless, standing outside the academy where she belonged, but could never afford to enter. "I have to go," he said suddenly, grabbing his coat. "Where are you going?" "To find them. To find Sophia and Pete. I have to." Alexander paused, struggling with emotions he had suppressed for years. "I have to make this right." As he rushed toward the elevator, Alexander's mind was already racing with plans. He would find Sophia immediately, bring her home, give her everything she deserved. The best teachers, the finest instruments, a trust fund that would ensure she never wanted for anything. But as the elevator descended toward the lobby, a darker thought crept into his consciousness. If someone else was looking for Sophia, someone with professional resources and unknown motives, then his niece might be in more danger than just homelessness. And Alexander Reed was about to discover that some secrets from the past were worth killing to protect. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby, and Alexander stepped out into a world that had fundamentally changed in the space of one morning. He was no longer just a ruthless CEO. He was an uncle with a debt to pay and a family to protect. But first, he had to find Sophia before someone else did. Time was running out. The truth about Sophia's identity has shattered Alexander's world, but darker forces are closing in on his newfound family. As dangerous secrets from the Reed family's past emerge, Alexander must race against time to protect the niece he never knew existed. The final revelation will change everything you thought you knew about this story. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and tell me in the comments if you think Alexander can truly change and become the uncle Sophia deserves. The sun was setting over Manhattan as Alexander's Tesla navigated through the narrow streets of Queens, following the GPS coordinates Ray had provided for Pete Kowalski's address. Alexander's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with everything he had learned about his niece's tragic circumstances. Pete lived in a small apartment above a corner bodega, the kind of building that had housed working-class families for generations. Alexander climbed the narrow staircase, each step echoing in the dimly lit hallway, and knocked softly on the door marked 3B. The door opened to reveal Pete's weathered face, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he saw Alexander's expensive suit and commanding presence. "Mr. Reed, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you and Sophia," Alexander said, his usual authoritative tone softened by genuine urgency. "It's important. More important than you can imagine." Pete hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but Sophia's voice called from inside the small apartment. "Uncle Pete? Is that the piano man?" "Yeah, sweetheart, it is." Pete stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in, I guess." The apartment was tiny but spotlessly clean, with mismatched furniture that had been arranged with obvious care. The walls were covered with Sophia's drawings, mostly pictures of pianos and musical notes, created with whatever art supplies Pete could afford. On a small card table sat her cardboard piano, the keys worn smooth from countless hours of practice. Sophia looked up from where she had been sitting on the floor, working on homework by the light of a small lamp. Her face lit up with genuine happiness when she saw Alexander. "Mr. Reed, did you come to tell me when I can start my piano lessons?" Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after everything she had endured, Sophia's first thought was still about music, about the promise he had made in a moment of cruel arrogance that morning. "Sophia, I need to tell you something very important," he said, kneeling down to her level. "Something about your family." But Pete immediately stepped closer, protective instincts activated. "Now hold on there, Mr. Reed. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" "I'm not playing a game," Alexander interrupted, looking directly into Sophia's curious dark eyes. "Sophia, do you remember anything about your mother, your real mother?" Sophia's expression grew thoughtful. "Mama Elena was my real mama. She took care of me when I was little after the bad thing happened to my first mama." "What do you remember about your first mama?" Sophia closed her eyes, concentrating. "She had long dark hair like mine. She sang to me sometimes, lullabies with pretty melodies. And she smelled like flowers, jasmine, I think. She used to say I was her little songbird." Her eyes opened, bright with memory. "Her name was Emma." Alexander's heart clenched. Emma had always worn jasmine perfume, even as a teenager. "Sophia, Emma was my sister. That makes you my niece. You're my family." The silence that followed was profound. Pete's mouth fell open in shock, while Sophia stared at Alexander with wide eyes, processing this life-changing information. You're my uncle," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I didn't know about you before. I'm sorry you've been alone, that you've had to struggle. If I had known—" Alexander's voice broke slightly. "I would have found you immediately." Sophia stood up slowly and walked over to him, studying his face with the intense concentration she usually reserved for music. "You have Mama Emma's eyes," she said finally. "The same grey color, but sadder." Before Alexander could respond, Sophia threw her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "I always prayed for family," she whispered against his shoulder. "Uncle Pete is wonderful, but I dreamed about having someone who came from the same place as me." Pete cleared his throat roughly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Well, I'll be damned. I mean, I'll be darned," he corrected quickly, glancing at Sophia. All this time she had real family out there. Alexander held Sophia tightly, feeling a protective love he had never experienced before flooding through his chest. "I'm going to take care of you now, Sophia. You'll never want for anything again. The best schools, the finest piano teachers, a beautiful home. Will Uncle Pete come too?" Sophia asked immediately, pulling back to look at Alexander with concern. "I can't leave Uncle Pete. He saved me when Mama Elena died. He's been my family too." Alexander looked at Pete, seeing the quiet dignity and love that had kept his niece safe for 2 years. "Of course," he said firmly. "Pete, if you're willing, I'd like you to come work for me, head of security for my personal residence. The job comes with a full apartment in my building, excellent salary, and the knowledge that you'll always be part of Sophia's life." Pete's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that? For an old maintenance worker?" "You're not just a maintenance worker," Alexander said sincerely. "You're the man who saved my niece when I wasn't there to do it myself. You're family now, too." As the three of them sat together on Pete's worn couch, making plans for Sophia's new life, Alexander's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Ray Morrison. "Urgent. Found out who's been looking for Sophia. Call me now. You're all in danger." Alexander excused himself and stepped into Pete's small kitchen to call Ray back. "Alex, thank God!" Ray's voice was tense with urgency. "You need to get Sophia and get out of there immediately." "What are you talking about? The people looking for Sophia? They're working for Damian Reed." Alexander's blood turned to ice. Damian Reed was his father's brother, a man who had been cut out of the family fortune decades ago due to his criminal associations and violent tendencies. Alexander had assumed Damian was either dead or in prison somewhere. "That's impossible," Alexander said. "Damian was disowned 30 years ago. He has no legal claim to anything." "Nah, that's where you're wrong," Ray said grimly. "I found court documents from Emma Morrison's estate. Apparently, before Emma died, she filed papers naming Damian as Sophia's guardian in the event of her death. She was desperate, Alex, and Damian convinced her he had changed, that he wanted to reconnect with family." But that can't be legally binding if—" "It is legally binding," Ray interrupted. "And here's the worst part. If anything happens to you, as Sophia's closest living relative, Damian becomes her guardian and gains control of her inheritance from Emma's estate, which, thanks to a life insurance policy Emma took out, is worth about $2 million. Alexander felt the world spinning around him. "Are you saying Damian would hurt me to get to Sophia?" "Alex, I did some digging into Damian's recent activities. He's been involved with some very dangerous people. Money laundering, illegal gambling, loan sharking. He owes the wrong people a lot of money, and Sophia's inheritance would solve his problems." "How did he even find out about Sophia?" "Emma's lawyer contacted him after she died, trying to honor her wishes. Damian has been looking for Sophia ever since, but she disappeared into the foster system. Until today, when your little demonstration at the academy caught someone's attention." Alexander's mind raced. Someone at the academy must have recognized the Reed name and made inquiries. In trying to help Sophia, he had inadvertently exposed her to danger. "Ray, how much time do we have?" "Not much. My sources say Damian's people have been asking questions in the neighborhood for the past few hours. They know about Pete. They know about this address." Alexander looked through the kitchen doorway at Sophia and Pete, sitting together on the couch, Sophia showing Pete how to position his fingers on her cardboard piano. They looked so peaceful, so happy, completely unaware that danger was closing in. "What do I do?" Get them out of there now. Take them somewhere safe while I coordinate with NYPD. And Alex? Ray's voice grew even more serious. Damian Reed is desperate, which makes him extremely dangerous. Don't underestimate what he's capable of. Alexander ended the call and returned to the living room, trying to keep his expression calm. Sophia, Pete, I need you to pack quickly. We're going to my penthouse tonight. Right now? Pete asked, sensing the urgency in Alexander's tone. Right now, Alexander confirmed. It's not safe here anymore. Sophia looked up at him with those perceptive dark eyes. Uncle Alexander, are the bad people coming? Before he could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the stairway outside, followed by a sharp knock on the door. Pete Kowalski, came a rough voice from the hallway. We know the little girl is in there. Open up, and nobody gets hurt. Alexander felt every protective instinct in his body ignite as he looked at Sophia's frightened face. His niece, his family, was in danger, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. But as more footsteps thundered up the stairs and voices began coordinating outside the door, Alexander realized they might already be too late. Before we dive into this heart-stopping moment, please hit subscribe if you're invested in Sophia's safety, and let me know in the comments if you think they'll escape. The apartment fell deadly silent, except for Sophia's quick, frightened breathing. Alexander's mind raced through their options. The window led to a fire escape, but it was 3 stories up, with nowhere to go but down into the alley where more of Damian's men might be waiting. Uncle Pete, Sophia whispered, I'm scared. Pete moved protectively in front of her, while Alexander pressed his ear to the door, listening to the voices in the hallway. Boss says alive if possible, but do what you gotta do, came a gruff whisper. The girl's worth more than the old man or the suit. Alexander's blood boiled. They were talking about Sophia like she was a commodity, a prize to be claimed. He pulled out his phone and quickly texted Ray their location and situation, then turned to Pete. Is there another way out? Pete nodded grimly. Fire escape, but they probably have guys down there too. Wait. His eyes lit up. The building next door shares a basement. There's a utility tunnel that connects them. I helped install some pipes there last month. Can we get to the basement? Service stairs at the end of the hall, but we'd have to get past them. Alexander looked around the small apartment desperately, his gaze falling on Sophia's drawings covering the walls. Among them was a detailed sketch of the building's layout that she must have drawn from Pete's descriptions. The girl's artistic memory had captured every detail. Sophia, he said urgently, in your drawing there, what's that room next to Pete's apartment? Sophia studied her own artwork with remarkable calm considering the circumstances. That's Mr. Giovanni's apartment, but he's in the hospital. Uncle Pete has been collecting his mail. Pete's face brightened with understanding. The old Italian gentleman in 3A. His apartment has a dumbwaiter that connects to the restaurant downstairs. It hasn't been used in years, but it might still work, Alexander finished. The knocking on the door intensified, accompanied by the sound of someone testing the locks. We don't have much time, Pete said, moving toward a small window that opened onto the building's central courtyard. If I can get us into Giovanni's apartment. Alexander was already lifting Sophia. Do it. Pete opened the window and carefully climbed out onto the narrow ledge that ran along the building's facade. The ledge was barely 6 inches wide, 3 stories above the courtyard, but Pete moved with the confident balance of someone who had worked construction for decades. Hand me Sophia, he called softly. Alexander's every instinct rebelled against putting his niece in such danger, but the sound of splintering wood from the door left him no choice. He carefully passed Sophia through the window into Pete's strong arms. Don't look down, sweetheart, Pete whispered. Just look at Uncle Alexander. Sophia kept her eyes fixed on Alexander as Pete carried her along the ledge toward Giovanni's window. Alexander followed, his expensive leather shoes slipping dangerously on the narrow concrete. Behind them, the apartment door crashed open. "They're not here!" came an angry shout. "Search the building!" Pete had already jimmied Giovanni's window open, apparently not his first time helping the elderly neighbor, and was helping Sophia climb inside. Alexander followed just as heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway outside. Giovanni's apartment was dark and smelled of medicine and loneliness. Pete led them quickly to the small kitchen where an ancient dumbwaiter sat hidden behind a wooden panel. "This connects to Rossini's restaurant downstairs," Pete explained, opening the old mechanism. "It's small, but—" "I'll go first," Alexander said, but Pete shook his head. "You're too big. Sophia and I can fit, but you'll have to take the regular stairs and meet us downstairs. There's an exit through the restaurant's back alley." "I'm not leaving Sophia." "Uncle Alexander," Sophia said with remarkable composure, "Uncle Pete knows buildings. We need to trust him." The sound of doors being kicked open echoed through the building as Damien's men searched each apartment systematically. Alexander knelt in front of Sophia, taking her small hands in his. "I promise you, sweetheart, I will find you. No matter what happens, I will never let anyone hurt you." Sophia nodded solemnly, then surprised him by pulling a small piece of paper from her pocket, a crude business card she had made with crayons. "This has Uncle Pete's phone number," she said, "in case we get separated." Alexander tucked the precious card into his jacket pocket, kissed Sophia's forehead, and watched as Pete helped her into the dumbwaiter. Pete squeezed in beside her, and Alexander lowered them slowly toward the restaurant below. Then he heard Giovanni's door being tested. Alexander moved swiftly through the old man's apartment, looking for anything he could use as a weapon or distraction. In Giovanni's bedroom closet, he found what he was looking for: the old man's collection of vintage photographs from his days as a professional opera singer. The door crashed open just as Alexander threw the entire collection of photographs into the air, creating a blizzard of confusion. In the chaos, he dove toward the window, but a strong hand grabbed his shoulder. "Alexander Reed!" came a voice that made his blood run cold. He turned to face a man he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years, Damien Reed, his father's brother. Damien was older now, grey-haired and scarred, but his eyes held the same cruel intelligence that had made him dangerous even as a young man. "Hello, nephew," Damien said with a cold smile. "Looking for something?" "Where's Sophia?" Alexander demanded. "Safe, for now. But her safety depends entirely on your cooperation." Damien gestured to the two large men flanking him. "You're going to sign some papers, transferring guardianship of your niece to me, her loving great-uncle who wants to give her a proper home." "Never." Damien's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that." He nodded to his men, who stepped forward menacingly, but before they could reach Alexander, a new voice cut through the tension. "NYPD, nobody move!" Ray Morrison stood in the doorway with 3 armed police officers, their weapons drawn and aimed at Damien's crew. "Damien Reed, you're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, and about 6 other felonies I'll think of on the way to the station." Damien's expression shifted from triumph to rage. "This isn't over, Alexander. That little girl belongs to me legally. I'll get her eventually." "No," Alexander said firmly. "You won't." "Confirm." As the police led Damien away in handcuffs, Alexander rushed downstairs to find Sophia and Pete waiting in Rossini's restaurant, sharing a plate of pasta with the concerned Italian owner who had found them emerging from his dumbwaiter. Sophia ran into Alexander's arms, and he held her tightly, overwhelmed with relief and a fierce protective love that had transformed him completely in the space of one day. But even as he celebrated their safety, Alexander knew this was just the beginning. Damien had been right about one thing: the legal battle for Sophia's custody was far from over. However, Alexander Reed was no longer the cold, arrogant businessman who had mocked a homeless child that morning. He was an uncle who had found his family, and he would fight with everything he had to protect it. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in his life, Alexander was fighting for something more important than money or success. He was fighting for love. This is it, the incredible conclusion to Sophia's story. If you're as emotionally invested as I am, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of family and second chances. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the elegant living room of his penthouse, watching Sophia practice on the Steinway concert grand piano he had purchased for her. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden highlights in her dark hair as her small fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence and skill. She was playing Chopin's Minute Waltz, a piece her teacher, the renowned pianist Professor Helena Vasquez, had assigned to challenge her growing technical abilities. But what struck Alexander most wasn't Sophia's remarkable progress. It was the pure joy on her face as she played, the same expression of wonder she had worn that first day outside the academy. "Uncle Alexander," Sophia called without stopping her practice, "Professor Vasquez says I'm ready to audition for the Young Artist program at Juilliard." Alexander felt his chest swell with pride. In just 6 months, Sophia had progressed from a street child practicing on cardboard to a serious candidate for one of the most prestigious music programs in the world. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he said, settling into his favorite leather chair to listen. This had become their morning ritual, Sophia practicing while Alexander reviewed business documents, both of them sharing the comfortable silence of family. Pete emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of breakfast, his appearance transformed by 6 months of good nutrition and the security of a stable home. As head of security for Alexander's building, he had not only found purpose and respect, but had become an integral part of their unusual family. "Mr. Reed," Pete said formally. He still insisted on the respectful address despite Alexander's repeated requests to use his first name. "Your lawyer called." "The custody hearing has been moved up to next week." Alexander's expression darkened slightly. Despite Damien's imprisonment on criminal charges, his legal claim to guardianship had created a complex court battle that had been dragging on for months. Damien's lawyers argued that Emma's written wishes superseded Alexander's biological relationship to Sophia, and the case had become a media sensation. "Is there anything to worry about?" Sophia asked, her music stopping as she sensed the tension in the room. Alexander and Pete exchanged glances. They had tried to shield Sophia from the worst details of the legal proceedings, but she was too intelligent not to understand that her future was being decided by strangers in courtrooms. "The judge wants to interview you next week," Alexander said gently, "just to make sure you understand what's happening and what you want." Sophia climbed down from the piano bench and walked over to Alexander, settling beside him with the unconscious confidence of a child who had never doubted her welcome. "I know what I want," she said simply. "I want to stay with my family, with you and Uncle Pete. It might not be that simple, sweetheart. The law is complicated, and sometimes—" "Uncle Alexander," Sophia interrupted, her 7-year-old voice carrying surprising wisdom. "Do you remember what I told you that first day about music?" Alexander smiled. "You said music isn't about having expensive things or being born into the right family. That's right. Music is about having a heart that understands beauty and hands willing to work until that beauty can be shared with the world." Sophia took his large hand in both of her small ones. "Family is like music. It's not about blood or papers or what judges say. It's about hearts that understand love and people willing to work every day to take care of each other." Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. In 6 months, Sophia had taught him more about what truly mattered than 32 years of business success had ever revealed. "You're absolutely right," he said, pulling her close. No matter what any court decides, you will always be my family." The doorbell chimed, and Pete went to answer it, returning with Ray Morrison and a well-dressed woman Alexander didn't recognize. "Alex," Ray said, his expression mixing excitement with concern, "I'd like you to meet Judge Margaret Chen. She's the family court judge who's been assigned to Sophia's case." Alexander stood quickly, surprised by this unexpected visit. "Your Honor, I wasn't expecting—" "Please sit," Judge Chen said kindly. She was a small, elegant woman in her 50s, with intelligent eyes, and a manner that immediately put people at ease. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I've been following Sophia's case closely, and I wanted to meet with all of you informally before next week's hearing." Sophia looked up at the judge with curiosity rather than fear. "Are you the person who decides where I get to live?" Judge Chen smiled. "I am, sweetheart. And I wanted to ask you some questions, if that's okay." "Okay," Sophia said, then added politely, "Would you like to hear me play piano? Uncle Alexander says music helps people understand each other better." "I would love that." Sophia returned to her piano and began playing Bach's Invention No. 1 in C major, a piece that showcased both her technical skill and her growing musical maturity. As the crystalline notes filled the elegant living room, Alexander watched Judge Chen's expression soften with genuine emotion. When Sophia finished, Judge Chen applauded warmly. "That was beautiful, Sophia. How do you feel when you play?" "Like I'm home," Sophia said without hesitation. "Like all the sadness goes away and there's only beauty left." "And where do you feel most at home? Here with your Uncle Alexander and Uncle Pete?" Sophia nodded emphatically. "This is where I belong. Uncle Alexander gave me music, and Uncle Pete gave me family love, and together they gave me a real home where I don't have to be scared anymore." Judge Chen turned to Alexander. "Mr. Reed, I've reviewed all the documents in this case, including the character witnesses, psychological evaluations, and home studies. I've also spoken with Detective Morrison about your Uncle Damien's criminal activities and his true motivations for seeking custody." Alexander held his breath, knowing that Sophia's entire future hung on this woman's decision. "I've been a family court judge for 20 years, Judge Chen continued, "and I've learned that the best interests of the child aren't always reflected in legal documents or biological relationships. They're reflected in love, stability, and genuine commitment to a child's well-being." She paused, looking around the room at the three people who had become an unconventional but loving family. Damien Reed's claim to guardianship is legally valid under the original documents Emma Morrison filed. However, those documents were signed under duress by a desperate young mother who had no other options. The evidence clearly shows that Damien's interest in Sophia is financial rather than paternal, and his criminal conviction makes him unfit for guardianship under any circumstances. Alexander felt Sophia's small hand slip into his, squeezing tightly. "Therefore," Judge Chen concluded with a warm smile, "I'm awarding full permanent custody of Sophia Martinez to Alexander Reed, with Pete Kowalski designated as her legal guardian in the event anything happens to Mr. Reed." Sophia let out a whoop of joy and threw herself into Alexander's arms, while Pete wiped tears from his weathered cheeks. "Welcome home, Sophia," Judge Chen said softly, "for good this time." As Judge Chen and Ray prepared to leave, Sophia ran to the piano one more time. "Judge Chen, I want to play something special for you, to say thank you." Her fingers found the keys, and she began playing a piece Alexander had never heard before, a simple, beautiful melody that seemed to capture all the joy and gratitude in her young heart. "What is that piece?" Judge Chen asked. Sophia looked up with a radiant smile. "I wrote it myself. It's called Family Song. But it's about finding the people who love you enough to help you become who you're meant to be." As the judge and detective left, Alexander stood with his arm around Sophia's shoulders, watching Pete carefully arrange her sheet music for tomorrow's lesson. 6 months ago, he had been a cold, arrogant businessman who measured worth in dollars and success in acquisitions. Now, he was an uncle, a guardian, and a member of a family bound not by blood or law, but by choice, love, and the shared commitment to help a gifted little girl reach her extraordinary potential. "Uncle Alexander," Sophia said, looking up at him with those dark eyes that had first captured his attention outside the music academy. "Do you think Mama Emma would be proud of us?" Alexander thought about his half-sister, the young mother who had died trying to provide for her daughter, who had trusted the wrong person in her desperation, but had loved Sophia enough to fight for her future. "I think she would be incredibly proud," he said. "I think she's watching over us right now, knowing that her little songbird finally found her way home." Sophia nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Tomorrow I start working on Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Professor Vasquez says if I master it, I might be ready to audition for Carnegie Hall's Young Artists Showcase next year." Alexander laughed, amazed by his niece's boundless ambition and talent. "One step at a time, sweetheart. You have your whole life ahead of you to conquer the world." "I know," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "But Uncle Alexander, I already conquered the most important thing." "What's that?" Sophia's smile could have lit up all of Manhattan. "I found my family. Everything else is just music." As the sun set over the city that had brought them together, Alexander Reed understood that sometimes the most valuable acquisitions couldn't be bought, negotiated, or planned. Sometimes they could only be received as gifts, gifts that transform not just your life, but your very soul. The little piano prodigy had taught him that the most beautiful music wasn't found in concert halls or conservatories. It was found in the everyday symphony of a family loving each other, supporting each other, and helping each other reach for dreams that once seemed impossible. And in the penthouse overlooking Manhattan, as Sophia practiced her scales, and Pete prepared dinner, and Alexander reviewed tomorrow's business with one ear always tuned to his niece's music, that symphony played on, beautiful, complex, and filled with the promise of many more movements yet to come.